30 dead, so they account. In the millions, the amount. A hole where the plane fell 20 feet deep. In the earth, where people still stand and weep. Tonight, along the rows of light, bleak and desolate is the sight of tents of helpers that were spread to take away the charred and dead. All through the night, their lights burn bright, a memory to the living hell that burst forth that tragic morning when the jet plane tanker fell. The tragic crash of KC-135, known as Rocky 42 in Wichita, Kansas in 1965, highlighted the civil rights issues prevalent both in Wichita and the nation. Both prior to and in response to the crash, Wichita agencies took responsibility to ensure emergency measures were implemented and followed. Like most of the U.S. in the 1960s, Wichita was dealing with segregation. In Wichita, Kansas, 1958, 10 African American students led a sit-in at Dockham's drugstore, paving the way for sit-ins of the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, but race relations were still causing conflict. Americans were able to witness the protests and their results with the new invention of television. However, the northern part of Wichita was severely segregated.
Everything else that was taking place, those race relations, that discord, that strife, I think sort of also consumed what was happening in Wichita.
The bright morning of January 16, 1965, Sonia House, a resident who lived on Piatt Street in Wichita's predominantly African-American neighborhood, was enjoying spending time with her nephew and son, who were sitting in the living room watching Mighty Mouse just like they did every Saturday morning. Sonia was in the kitchen cooking breakfast for them when she thought she heard the television rapidly getting louder. She ran into the living room, astonished with what she saw. Through the window, she saw a large object hurtling towards the ground in a dark plume of smoke. As the craft hit the earth, it emitted a bright flash and earthquake-like vibrations through the earth. Even people a few miles away could feel the tremors under their feet. People and houses in the direct area of the crash unfortunately found no escape. Horrible black smoke had filled the sky, covering up the sun, and fires consumed nearby houses and their inhabitants. Large pieces of shrapnel flew through the air, impaling the houses and embedding themselves into the ground. A heat wave spread out for many blocks. House and car windows shattered. Cars were flipped and flattened. Trees were uprooted and burnt, and lampposts were twisted into large, curled metal wires.
We couldn't figure out what was going on. But like I said, the fire was on fire. Everything was burning. The grass and everything was... I couldn't imagine grass burning so high, but it was burning high, you know. And then it was just kind of like rolling down the street.
People inside their homes were thrown across their rooms by the shockwave, but that wasn't the worst of it. Many people that had seen the horrid sight of the falling plane had tried to escape, but found themselves being burnt alive by the jet fuel. Their skeletons were later found still frozen in their last moments. Nobody in the range of the spouting jet fuel was spared. Some people didn't even know what had happened, as they were still sleeping when the plane crashed. Residents trapped inside their homes had no chance of being rescued. It was already too late. Small numbers of people did attempt rescues, running through thick smoke to evacuate confused neighbors and witnessing the appalling sights. 31 people died that day, including the 7 members of the crew. Ages ranged from an unborn child to a 66-year-old man. As soon as the call went out, within minutes, all emergency vehicles were at the scene with well-trained dispatchers. They went out with a plan, with no question with what they were doing. Of course, nobody expects a jet tanker to crash in a neighborhood on a quiet Saturday morning, but they did what they could for the time being. By about 11 a.m., 100 air police had been summoned from McConnell to help. About 15 police were available at 9:33, shortly after the crash. Jet fuel burned the ground, making the air and conditions unbearable. It burned for 900 feet around the crash, making it extremely difficult to get around. Homes in the neighborhood only acted as kindling to the aggressive flames and fuel, causing each passing second to be worse than the last, not to mention downed power lines and shrapnel from the tattered jet tanker. About 25 minutes after impact, the flames were under control, but the smell of jet fuel still lingered in the air. 2 months after, on March 18, 1965, a conference of fire chiefs from all over the country came together in Memphis, Tennessee, to discuss the before, during, and after of the crash. Fire Chief Magayi gave a speech, saying, "I am not talking about plans that are simply put down on paper and then placed in a filing cabinet, but I am talking about a workable plan that is reviewed and updated annually with all the agencies that are in the organizational structure of your disaster plan. I am talking about a continuous training program that is also updated annually or periodically as new materials are developed that will create special problems in fire control." Meetings were held monthly to examine the possibility of an aircraft crashing in Wichita. There were 2 of these meetings within 2 months of the crash, where the people involved discussed what they would do in the events of such a disaster. The disaster committee had met a month before and 6 days before to examine what actions they would take if a plane were to crash in the Wichita area.
Just after the crash, most everyone, white or black, pitched in to help the Piatt Street residents. At this point, race relation was not an issue. The only problem being, where will these people live, who will clothe and feed them, and who will help them through the rebuilding and settling process. And that's exactly what the citizens of Wichita did. Many offered their homes to people who needed shelter. Around 150 volunteers even took the time to sort through donations. A command post was set up by the Air Force to pay victims of the crash. Clarence Walker, who merely escaped from his home and watched it collapse right before his eyes, was not treated well after the crash, yet he was one of the majorly affected on that Saturday. Walker spent 2 weeks in the hospital and halfway through the visit was asked to speak to the Air Force. He was told he needed a lawyer and was given no information why. After the interview, Walker was not talked to or helped by anyone else or any other organization, other than Red Cross and a few Wichita churches. Walker's story is one of the main factors in the belief that it was done on purpose. To some of the residents, it had proven that the crash was not an accident. There was no doubt in their mind that they were directly targeted. Civil rights issues still could not be avoided, even with the efforts from the Air Force and the community. Most relief workers were white, as well as the members of the Red Cross Board, the only black man being Jim Garman, who was recruited just after the crash. By some, the crash was blamed on the Air Force, accusing them that they were directly targeted because of their race. Some believe that the remnants of the parachute, the cord and the cloth found in a section of one of the engines, was to blame, possibly having been sucked into the front of the engine. Later reports said that if this would have happened, there would have also been remains in the front section of the engine, but it was found to be clear. Also, the nylon of the cord and the cloth would have been burned immediately due to the scorching heat. The most common rumors were the ones claiming that the pilots had intentionally dove into a vacant lot. Specialists at Oklahoma City Air Material Area reported that a part of the engine broke away during the impact and rolled through the debris. About a year after the crash, February 18, 1966, a meeting was held at the Dobbs House dining room. Almost 100% of the key department and administrative heads of the Wichita-Sedgwick County Crash and Disaster Procedures attended. The meeting was called to practice new procedures in result of the crash, including setting up a mobile hospital under emergency conditions. Again, another meeting was held on April 5, 1966, to review and re-establish the crash and disaster phone in the events of an emergency. Once this key group was in place, the alarm would spread through the prearranged telephones and radio networks to facilities that appeared in the procedures. These groups were organized, trained, and prepared to independently or cooperatively support the authorities' efforts in recovery from emergency. By taking responsibility to ensure emergency measures were in place and practiced, agencies were able to effectively respond to the crash and save lives. The first memorial service for the Piatt Street crash took place at the McConnell-based chapel on June 9, 2001, 36 years after the crash. A stone marker was established, and the family members and the other airmen carried stargazer lilies, one for each crew member, down the aisle. The delay in the memorial service and monument was contributed to the racial issues surrounding the crash. With each year lingering on without a memorial, the members of the Piatt Street community felt as if it was not important enough for anyone to need something to remember the dead.
People just didn't talk about it. It seemed that the community closed up right after that, and by not talking about it, there was a bitterness that grew, a bitterness I found several years later when I came into the community and asked about the incident, because people didn't know why it happened. They didn't know why there wasn't a memorial at the time. There still wasn't a memorial when I arrived there in 2003.
Finally, in 2007, a large granite memorial was raised south of 20th and Piatt Street. Since the construction of the memorial, it has sadly been vandalized. With no suspect, there was nothing to do but let it be.
And I think that's mean. Because I don't understand why would they want to hurt a monument that's dedicated to dead people. But why would they want to do that? But they come by and destroy it and mess it up. Right now, we just got 2 benches down there. We started off with 4. 5. We had 5 benches. Now we just got 2.
The tragic crash of KC-135 in Wichita, Kansas in 1965 highlighted the civil rights issues of the 1960s when it crashed in a heavily segregated community. The crash had a major impact on Wichita, and even though race relations weren't an issue at the time, organizations from all around came together and provided the necessities for those that were in need. In the years after, changes were made to agencies to better themselves and others in case of emergency.